Hello everyone and welcome to the very first Giant Slayer LOR patch highlights video. This is one of the biggest balance patches we've had to date, and it's sure to shake up the meta quite a bit. Because it is so large, this video is going to focus on the tournament relevant balance changes only. For the full patch, check out playruneterra.com. With that said, let's jump into the video. But before we begin, please check out all the links in our description. We've got a lot of folks working behind the scenes that help make this video happen. We're also running weekly LOR esports events as well as other exciting lore content to come, so be sure to also follow our Giant Slayer LOR social media pages. Alright, back to video, and to start things off, we're going to talk about the champion changes. 3 champions are getting touched in this patch, and they're arguably all buffs. The first champion receiving a buff is Darius. Darius's level 2 version is getting a 1 health buff from 5 up to 6. Darius, in general, has been relegated to tier 2 decks. He really only fits in an aggressive shell, and the aggressive decks tend to stop their curve at Decimate, which is a cheaper option than Darius himself. He has seen relevant play before, but don't expect this change to make a huge difference on his play rates at high levels. The next champion getting buffed in this patch is Anivia. Anivia is getting a cost reduction from 7 mana down to 6. Anivia is a mid-range and control card that saw a lot more play before the Rising Tides expansion. When that expansion hit, 7-cost champions like Nautilus really made Anivia look rather lackluster by comparison. Anivia dropping down to the 6-cost slot may very well open back up some of the Anivia-based strategies that have been around since the early days of LOR. The last champion getting adjusted has, by far, the largest number of changes. Braum is essentially getting a full rework. First, Braum's cost is increasing from 3 up to 4. Level 1 Braum is going from 0 up to 1 power, and also has his old level 2's text where surviving damage will summon a mighty Poro. Level 2 Braum will now act like many other level 2 champions, which is just getting a 1 power and 1 health buff to the level 1 version. This is obviously a huge change to Braum, but a much needed one. Braum has been the perennial starter champion, and while he is one of the more unique champions, his power level has never matched the other champions or even follower cards at the 3-cost spot. With the ability to start generating mighty Poros immediately and having actual power associated with his base version, we may start to see Braum popping up in mid-range Freljord base lists. Let's move on now to the follower and spell changes of the patch. This patch has a good mix of nerfs, buffs, and full reworks to cards. The first card on our list is Genevieve Elmhart. She's getting a +1/+1 buff, going from a 4/4 up to a 5/5. Genevieve has been on the cusp of playability in Demacia and Scout list, but when you compare her to her 6-mana counterpart, Cithria the Bold, she looks rather lackluster. This buff may not be enough to give her the nod over Big Sith, but it definitely pushes her in decks that want to utilize Scout or her ability to challenge. Next up is a very hotly contested and debated card, Unyielding Spirit. Unyielding Spirit is getting a huge nerf, going from burst speed down to fast speed. This may not seem like a huge nerf, but trust us, this is going to significantly neuter the card's power level. This is a welcome nerf to many, as Unyielding Spirit creates unwinnable situations for opponents and also is uninteractable at burst speed. It being moved to fast speed will relegate this card to fringe play. Having your 8-mana spell get countered by all fast removal is just too much for this card to be competitively viable in the same capacity that it was. Captain Farron is getting a rework that is likely just a direct buff. Instead of transforming every card in your hand into Decimate when you play him, it now just creates 3 additional Decimates. Creating a guaranteed 12 damage is quite strong, albeit over the course of several turns. The Captain has seen virtually 0 high-level play, and with this buff, we don't expect that changing. Aurora Borealis is getting its cost reduced from 7 down to 6. A welcome buff for sure, but the Poro strategy still suffers from the fact that you need to play weak units in general to live the Poro dream. This card is not the reason that the strategy hasn't broken into competitive. Poro Herder, on the other hand, is getting a bit of a rework. His cost is getting reduced from 4 down to 2, he's going from a 3/4 down to a 2/3, and his ability is now only going to draw you 1 Poro if you already control a Poro. This puts Poro Herder at the 2-drop slot on the curve, which fills a much-needed gap for the Poro strategy. With decent stats and pseudo card draw, the new Poro Herder is definitely going to push the strategy forward, but we're not expecting to see Poros at the top of the ladder just yet. Next up is one of the most dominant cards on ladder and in tournament play. They Who Endure is getting a cost increase from 6 mana up to 7. This is a much needed nerf, but at the end of the day, They Who Endure still functions the same. Opposing decks will now have an additional turn to put pressure on the They Who Endure decks, but they will still endure. To the surprise of many, there's a card in the game called Ren Shadowblade. We bring this up because not only does this card not see any play, it's likely that you may not even know the card exists. It used to be an 8-mana Ionia epic that was meant to make your opponent's future units gain ephemeral. It's now getting its cost reduced to 4, its power and health reduced to 3 and 3, gaining quick attack, and will now create a Shadow Fiend in your hand when it strikes. Long story short, this change is so drastic, it's very hard to predict the exact implications from it. It does generate card advantage for ephemeral strategies, which is a spot where those decks tend to struggle. It may not be strong enough to make the cut or even push these strategies out of the bottom tiers, but will withhold judgment until the community has had times to get their hands on it. Last on our list of adjusted epics is Jay Medarda. Jay's cost is being reduced from 8 down to 6, and his health and power are going from 6/6 down to 4/4. Jay is also losing the elusive keyword. Overall, this is a good change for Jay, as his ability to draw cards was his real strength. That said, Jay is still going to be left on the fringes even with his cost reduction, as he's still quite expensive. He won't see any less play with these changes, but that's because he saw virtually zero before. Escaped Abomination is another card that you may have never seen in your collection before, and that's because you haven't. This is a card that's created by Cursed Keeper, and it's getting its health reduced from 4 down to 3. This is what we call the Chump Wump treatment, and while it's only a 1 health reduction, the difference between 3 and 4 health is actually quite large. It's often the difference between trading for 1 versus trading for 2 cards. That said, we don't think Cursed Keeper will see any less play because of it. The power level is definitely being reduced, but it's being reduced from insane down to just very good. Dreg Dredgers is getting a power reduction from 2 down to 1. This will definitely hurt deep strategies, as not only did Double D push you closer to getting deep, he also usually traded up with a card that costed more than he did. Now he's much closer to the power level of some of the 1-cost Last Breath cards in Shadow Isles, which is honestly not a bad place to be. The last changes we'll talk about in this highlight videos are changes to the stealing cards mechanic. They now read: effects that draw cards from the enemy deck now draw from the bottom of the enemy deck rather than the top. A new keyword has been implemented called Nab. Nab says, draw a non-champion card from the bottom of the enemy deck. Alongside this change is a nerf to Black Market Merchant, who is getting his health reduced from 2 down to 1. This is a much needed nerf to Black Market Merchant, who is just too good at what he does, while also being able to survive a lot of the common cards that kill 2-cost utility cards like Vile Feast. This effect is possibly the most talked about mechanic in the game, and the one that has been called for nerfs and even removal from the game. In a way, this is a hedge. By that we mean the relative power level of these cards remains unchanged for the most part, but many of the feel-bad aspects of the card are now gone. This change will likely be applauded by the community on release, but it will only take a few games of playing against these cards to realize that drawing 2 cards or drawing reduced cost cards is just as good whether you're drawing from the top or the bottom of the enemy deck. That is going to be it for this Legends of Runeterra patch highlights video for patch 1.4. As mentioned before, this patch will likely shake up the meta quite a bit and may even lead to some new decks springing up. Let us know in the comment section below which card change you're most excited for. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying the video, be sure to like and subscribe for future Giant Slayer LOR videos.